hi, I think this is a welcome back to like all the hard stuff. My name is Samantha Jackson. I'm the Deputy Director of the Downtown Mesa Association and my partner in crime.
I'm Kate Borders with Downtown Tempe Authority. And this is actually my third business improvement district. So I was in Fresno before this and Milwaukee before that. So we just got this little intro about business improvement districts, which, you know, we call bids. And now we both represent bids. So we're going to dig out a little more.
In Arizona, I think there's 6. I was trying to do the math in my brain. Different than other parts of the country, we're actually enhanced municipal services districts. So we'll jump into that a little bit. But really quickly, just so we have a good sense of who we're talking to, can we just kind of do a around the room of like name and where you're coming from? Beautiful. Thank you guys.
And Stewart City Market.
Yeah.
Working hard.
I love when there's no one from our city. So
I know. So we can like really get real about what we're doing. Okay, so I know we don't have a ton of time, but the way that Kate and I are going to tag team this is that I'm going to talk about clean and safe, which is really kind of the backbones of what business improvement districts do. Then I'm going to turn it over to Kate, and she's going to jump into the rest of the fun things that we all do. And to get us going, I wanted to jump into a little bit of like, what's your why? So if you're talking about building a vibrant downtown, why? Who is your crowd? Why are you doing it? What are you doing? And feel free to answer, because I hate this. I hate like, so I want this to be as interactive and as possible. So what's your why? Why are you here today? Other than Flagstaff School.
Build a cultural center.
Cultural center, I like that. That's it. Nobody's just here. You're just here for like credits on a certification or something.
Economic driver.
I want to learn more about economic development.
Beautiful. All right. So typically in a downtown world, what do we talk about? Economic growth. A place that your town and city is known for, and downtowns are usually an identity. I always like to say, if you look at a Suns game being played in Phoenix, they kind of start, you know, from afar where the cacti are, and they kind of zoom in to downtown. So downtowns and city centers can really be an identity. In Mesa, where I work, part of our goal is to be a place where families gather, a central location for events, new types of housing, which I know Gilbert just getting ready to talk about new types of housing, increased tourism revenue, and a renewed spirit within the community, a place that the community itself can identify with. We actually just got back from Tampa Saturday, and we had a conference there in Tampa, and they're known as Champa Bay. So there's fun things when you have like winning teams, I guess you can do that kind of stuff. But you know, like when you have that sense of community, it's that thing that kind of brings us together, and a lot of that can happen in a downtown. So just like your optometrist, better one, better two. Let's talk about these places. Better one, better two. Where would you like to be? One. Let's talk about why you want to be in one. What's in this picture that you see? Restaurants, beer. I like that. Safe. Yeah. So the bottom one, who's a stock photo? So I gotta feel like I gotta say thanks, LMI or whoever they are, who let me borrow this photo. But what's wrong with number 2?
There's no one there.
Nobody's there. Yeah. Kind of dark and dank. So when you are in a business improvement district, and I missed Tim's presentation, so I apologize if this is duplicative, but yes, I mean, it's restaurants. It feels like it's a place where you want to be. What I love about this picture is like, look at all these kind of interesting signs. Boom, that dot, that sidewalk, that is good economic development. That didn't just happen. That probably was somebody who had a real vision about what they wanted this street to look like, and signs were a part of it. The other thing that happens is that you look at streetlights. And they're not just like your normal, like, street lights. We like to call those shoebox street lights. These are like decorative street lights. So again, somebody was thoughtful about that. I'm sure there's some urban planners in the room that, you know, probably have spent some good quality time on street lights. In a business improvement district, we talk about banners all of the time. Banners are announcing who we are, what we do, our organizations. Banners are talking about events that are coming up. In Tampa, they were a revenue generator. So they had their 25% of their banner where you could put a sponsorship, so you could sell that space. They sold that space. And they brought in money to their district in that way. The other thing that I love to draw your attention to are trees, because trees are important as well. They really soften a space. They, you know, digest carbon from all of the cars that drive by and park and all those kinds of things too. So, and that bottom space, I mean, you could look at it in two ways. You could look at it like scary. You could look at it like potential as well. And I think that's what business improvement districts do, that there's potential in these spaces. When you bring businesses together, it's like that tide that rises all boats. Business improvement district. So whose job is it?
I love it.
I stole 10 of these photos. I combined them, I should say, it's probably the better way. So with a business improvement district, when you're talking about whose job is it to hang banners, to clean sidewalks, to make sure trees are trimmed and trash cans are emptied. If that's not the city, then in this model, that's enhanced municipal services districts. That's enhanced services. So the idea behind this is that all of the property owners in this like area, that a very defined area, have all agreed to pool their money together to pay for these types of services. Clean and Safe being one of the the bigger programs, and where a lot of dollars end up being spent there. Placemaking, business development, marketing and events is typically what you see happen. One of the things that I left off of there is advocacy. So a really good, thing about having a downtown group and that's sort of focused on this one space is that it's a great way to start building voices for advocacy. Oh, and that is, by the way, this is our Mesa. So you can see our Mesa banners. That's our clean and one of our members of our clean sweep team. And here at the bottom, Diamond Tempe, that's, landscaping, and I'm guessing that's after power washing.
It is.
Right there, so. And then I think in Tim's presentation, he talked about the ambassadors in Phoenix. I took this picture here last night because ambassadors really are about being the eyes and ears of a business improvement district. And so they're the ones that are sort of like watching out if a tree limb is down and it's blocking a sidewalk, or if it, Lord forbid, has landed on somebody's car. That's happened before. They're noticing when streetlights are out. A lot of times when you're a city, you got a big city to cover. When you've got somebody concentrated in this really, kind of interesting locale, they can keep an eye out for things like that and report that kind of stuff. This picture is a picture of Hans Hughes, and I don't know that anybody outside of the Phoenix metropolitan area would have heard the story about Hans recently. He worked in downtown Phoenix for 12 years, and he was the most incredible ambassador. He used to literally stand on the corners in Phoenix, and he's this big booming like baritone voice, and he'd be like, "Hello folks, welcome to downtown." That's really special. So when you're talking about these kind of spaces, whether it's a downtown or if it's another kind of area that you're really interested in developing, you want to make it look good, right? You want your better one sort of, this looks like a great place to be, but an ambassador really makes the place like feel good. It's a feeling that they, kind of give that welcoming, friendly face. A lot of programs, you'll see the teams with radios and earpieces. It just gives that sense of security. And when you're a woman, especially out in the evening, you like to have a uniformed presence there with you because you feel like somebody else is watching out for your safety. So as you're thinking about developing these spaces, think about, again, who's your crowd? Who are you trying to attract? And what can you do that once they get there, that you make sure that they're happy and they want to stay and that they feel like they are a part of this space? that was sort of Hans's specialty. He was leaving home one night from work and he was struck by somebody who we believe was inebriated, and he passed away a month or so ago as a result of his injuries. But when I tell you that he was an incredible force, I really mean that. If you looked at the GoFundMe page, there were people on there that remembered Hans walked we have ASU downtown. Hans walked my daughter home from class one night. And that was like a mom. That wasn't even the person, that was the mom that remembered the story from the daughter who had that experience with Hans. And so there's really this kind of, I always like to say, this ripple effect of what can happen when you bring really good people into your spaces and you help them welcome your community and you really grow those relationships. And again, you grow those reasons that the community wants to be there, want to be a part of things. And that's really when you start to get like community like involvement and buy-in, and not always just the loud voices that we often hear at municipal levels. You also hear from some of these other voices as they really start to get involved in their communities. So that was my, I don't know, 5 or 10 minute spiel on
That's it?
yeah, that's it. That's me. That is me. Feel good spaces. Oh, and if you want to get a hold of me, that's me. That's my email address. I do have cards with me today. Woo, go downtown Mesa.
Sorry, bear with me for 1 second. Okay, so downtown Tempe, we also have ambassadors. And a lot of the things that we've talked about here so far. And I think what's really cool about us doing this together is that she's literally the operations expert. So how long have you been doing ops?
14 years
Yeah,
for
so
downtowns.
she's been in this world for 14 years. And I think it's really powerful because she knows those stories. And the one thing that we haven't talked about yet when it comes to ambassadors, because I'm not really going to dwell on that, but I just want to point out that all of our downtowns might have some homeless neighbors, and our ambassadors know those individuals by name. They know their stories. They know what's happening with them. They know what they need. Do they need an ID? Do they need an address to send the ID to? Do they have a family member in their place? Like, what is going on with these people? And they become sometimes a connection to all of the services that are available just by getting to know them. And even if they're not ready for services, our ambassadors will go up to them and on a daily basis say, how are you doing? Is there anything I can do for you? Do you need a water? Like anything. So that human service connection is also really, really critical that our downtowns provide. And we're not charged necessarily to do that. Like that's the above and beyond part of what our organizations do. So when you go back, think about kind of all of the layers, right? So what you were just talking about with Hans, and I think about this all the time because I've been in this world now for almost 20 years in the downtown world. And to me, this is all about our emotions. Like at the end of the day, we care about how we feel when we are in a space, even if you're not thinking about it, right? You're thinking about subconsciously whether you feel safe, whether you want to turn that corner, whether you're excited about this store or this street front, or if it feels like there's enough lighting, or why is there graffiti? Or if your kid is playing in some water and they're laughing and they're emoting. And whatever you're doing in these places, you might be taking your mother-in-law out to dinner or celebrating an anniversary. We do these things in places and then we emotionally connect to places. And I guarantee every single one of you have memories like that, whether it's where you live, where you have lived, a vacation, a trip, but we connect to places. So what we do is kind of create an opportunity for that connection. And I like to think of that as the baseline, right? How do we make it easier for you to connect with a place? Okay, this is an old slide. This is from 2007, but I think it's really helpful to understand the priorities of what we do. Everybody remembers Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Okay, what's at the bottom?
Food, shelter.
Housing, food, and shelter. What's at the top? Do you remember what's at the very top? Anybody? Self-actualization. So how do you get to self-actualization, right? You certainly can't do that as a human, which is, that's defined as being your best self. You certainly can't do that if you don't feel safe at night. You can't get a good night's sleep and you can't eat, right? You're not thinking about being your very best self. Well, this is our version of how downtowns become their very best self. And so it kind of walks you through what you need to do on the roadmap to being your best self as a downtown, which is why I think this is so fascinating. So we can't do anything if we don't have clean and safe. Everybody heard of the broken windows theory? Yeah, okay. It's classic, right? But we get it. It makes sense to us. I can't do anything with the rest of my budget if operations isn't happening, if clean and safe isn't happening. So on my team, the person who runs our operations, his name is Adam Jones. And so I always think of Adam as like the dad, and I'm like the mom. I'm like, can you get all of your budget wrapped up so I can have all the rest of the money to do the fun stuff? So it's kind of like, he makes sure that our place, so we also manage parking. So from start to finish, that your experience is that your parking is easy. And whether, I know you might not like paying for it, it's another conversation. We could have a whole session on parking, but that it's clean and it's safe and it's well maintained and it's groomed. And we talk about often, Adam and I, that his job is best if no one has to talk about it. Like if no one is talking about that it's dirty or that it's unsafe or that it's unclean or what's going on with these planters, then his job is done, right? The minute that attention is drawn to that, then we have a problem. So I love this. If anybody wants a copy of this, let me know. You just saw this photo. So I put this in there to just say thank you to all the people who are doing ops, because you allow us to do kind of the fun stuff, right? This is the cherry on top that now we're going to talk about. So once you have a clean and safe downtown, let's talk about what you need to do with it. So first is beautification and infrastructure. And I like to think of these as layers. So beautification and infrastructure is layer one. And this is everything from plants, you know, that make everything just look greener and feel like someone cares. You do this at your own home, right? When you care about your home, you have more plants. We all do. To painting pieces of our infrastructure. These are news racks. You can paint garbage cans, have the right garbage cans. You can paint your alleys. You can make places seem visually interesting. Banners, 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 all the seasons, across the street, on the street poles, the more decorative lighting. This is infrastructure that makes a place feel warm and welcoming. Sometimes it adds social commentary, right? It might let your guests know where you stand on different issues. Sometimes it adds humor. Okay, if we have a construction project going on, how can we be a little silly? But all of these are things that are existing in your environment that we have created in partnership with our cities and our municipalities to make sure that the place feels good. Sometimes it adds history. And this is the first layer, right, of just creating a place. This is passive. All of your guests can walk by and enjoy it. And a lot of times it's great if you get your merchants involved. So in a passive way, how can we even get our merchants to do things that are fun and interesting above and beyond? In rural communities, sometimes it's just pathways. It's just giving people ways to run and do things like that. Infrastructure that allows them to engage in a passive way. Took this picture just a couple days ago in Tampa because they have this whole green space where they just put chairs out. Passive, inviting. And we were there from 3 p.m. until 11 p.m.
It was packed
Packed.
the entire time. I was like, did they bring in people?
I don't know.
On this pathway and skateboard through here, and it was incredible. So many people that are in shape in Tampa. Running, walking.
There also were checkerboards, big, huge, like human-sized checkerboards, and up until 11 o'clock at night, there were little kids running around and playing. So also open carry. And amazingly, my walk back, I found no drunken people passed out on the Riverwalk. But this goes back to the infrastructure. Every community is different. What their tolerance level is different. But in Tampa, people are grabbing a beer and just walking on the Riverwalk. I wouldn't fly in Tempe, I'm just gonna tell you right now. Okay, so that was all the passive infrastructure beautification layer. Now what happens when you ask people to engage? I'm going to ask you to do something now with these things that I've put in our downtown. I want you to now connect with them. So these rabbits are a scavenger hunt. We have 13 of them all over our downtown. We want you to go find them all, right? They're beautiful, they're there. You can just pass by them or you can engage.
And I would just, if I could, just
Yeah.
add in, Mesa right now is doing something similar, but with bees. And those we just added, they're crocheted like bees. And so they don't even have to be like a permanent rabbit. They could be a very temporary thing that you could consider as well.
Sculptures that people want to take photo ops with, right? This is the Reedy River in Greenville, South Carolina. And people are waiting to take a photograph, you know, passive but engaging. This is out in the woods. I mean, you can do this in rural areas, right? You can do this anywhere. Harmony, California. This is we do this every single year. We put a big year up for New Year's. We partner with ASU. They put it up for graduation. It's great. We share the costs. Awesome. And then sometimes there are even murals that ask you to engage. It's my best friend. Copenhagen, they have actual places for you to jump from the sidewalk. Again, that probably wouldn't fly in some US cities, but it's there, it's infrastructure, it's engaging. And I love trampolines. So. Water, 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 water. Everyone loves water. Doesn't matter where you go, you see water and people are engaging and they want to take their shoes off and run around and play in it. Those are my kids. And then sometimes, again, there's a social component to these pieces. So this is a place where you can get food if you need it or give it if you want to support. So all those things, again, there's no human interaction. Those are just out there existing, but they're asking you to do something. The next layer is what happens when you add human interaction. So you might have buskers out, right? Again, it's not a timed thing. It's not like an event, but it's another layer of activation. Every year for Pride, we give away roses. We didn't do it this past year, so we didn't want to touch things and hand them to people, but we will return to this. We give away rainbow dyed roses to everyone on the street and just say happy Pride. This is an installation of fence art that we did with using volunteers. I think we had about 50 volunteers from SVB. So all of you in the corporate world, SRP and APS, we love our volunteers and so great partnering with you guys. And I think Goodwill's here too. So thank you for your sponsorship today as well. Having a piano up. People would sit and play the piano all the time. We paid a local artist to paint the piano. This is an exhibit, like things like this, where you bring in some sort of an exhibit. I can tell you more about this because it's a really fantastic project. But basically, Shared Studios has life-size video images, and they have about 25 of these around the country. And at any moment in time, you can essentially, for all intents and purposes, FaceTime with someone else in other 25 countries. Such a cool project, right? And then the final layer is events. So this feels fluffy to talk about events. When you're in city municipal world, it feels kind of like, I don't know, airy, light, like, but it's a big deal. And you all know it's a big deal because you all have events in your communities that have been there for a long time. We do too. That was our market. This is our parade going on 27 years, our holiday parade, and our art festival, which is 52 years old now. So this employs people, it brings people to our community, it creates that emotional connection to a space. We support almost 400 artists through this event who are now able to make a living. 30% of those are Arizona artists. And my little shoe store on the corner makes 10% of her revenues in a year from these 3 days. 10% of her 365 days of revenue comes from these 3 days. So events are a big deal in our communities. And I like to think of them as creating emotion and money. And if they're not doing one of those things, if your events aren't creating connection or driving revenues for yourself and your community, then there's really not a point in doing them. So we've canceled a lot of events in the past and said, you know what, this isn't doing anything for us anymore. It's a non-starter at this point. It's not really bringing our community together and it's a financial loss. A lot of events are financial losses. So those are the layers, and that's my contact information if you want to get in touch with me. And we love operations, events, placemaking, all the things. So questions? Yeah.
So one of the things you're talking about, and I'm just gonna use Pride because it seemed like it popped up in a couple of places. So when a city is kind of taking on that social lead, let's say we're going to somewhere else, honestly, everybody here is from big cities. Let's say, I'm sorry, I think anybody's from Arkansas or, a place that I guess where there's, a little bit more resistance to that. And you're going into an economic development department where things may be a little more traditional. How would you recommend navigating, like trying to do something that could be as controversial as that without catching fire?
Well, okay, if you're a city employee, so keep in mind, we're private, so we can do some of these things, but if you're a city employee, I would ask first, whatever city you're in Arkansas, hypothetically, because all of you are from Arkansas. Is there some sort of a league or a committee or a DEI program or something like that, or anything like that within the city that's being championed by the city? And then I would pull those people in. But I'm not a city employee, but I know that happens at Tempe. We're a progressive city, so you don't know. But I don't know. I would start with that.
Also goes back to your why and who, right? Like, who is your audience and why do you want to reach them? And if you're reaching your audience, then you're going to listen to kind of what they're open to. And I always feel like when you're going to make these kind of changes, you got to sometimes start really small, but those little small things add up over time to where you get to a point where you can give away rainbow colored roses to everybody on the sidewalk, because now they're open to receiving it, where years before then they might not have been. So you start out like with small, maybe you're just popping in rainbow flags in certain key places, or or something that and be ready for that conversation, right? Like if you're gonna do something that's a little controversial, then be ready for that, kind of courageous conversation that may need to happen from that. But your audience is who you're trying to build that space for is critical. So I would really sit back and think about what buttons you want to push, because you don't want to alienate your people. So.
But I also think you aren't doing a good job if you're not really challenging.
100%.
So
100%.
we like to challenge things.
Well, yeah, evolve. There's
This right here.
So this might be a question for the kind of the room at large, but I'm just thinking about a lot of the placemaking initiatives that you reference in all of your presentations, and how density and walkability is such an integral part of making those successful. Having those photo ops or those green spaces in isolation, they don't work, and that's why it works so well in downtown Tempe, because it's most walkable. And I think about those sort of initiatives in the context of a lot of the towns in Arizona, many of which are represented in this room, that don't have that walkability. Or what do you do about that? Or at what point does that come into the conversation of how do we build a downtown from scratch when our town is set up for cars and not for people?
So if I went back to that Better One, Better Two photo, one of the things that stuck out to me right away was sidewalks. And that photo had a lot of crumbly sidewalks. And sidewalks cost a lot of money. Concrete isn't cheap, especially with supply chain stuff these days. So one of the things that I think we do a lot of in downtowns are pilot programs. So we're taking the funding that we can get and proving that if we do this thing, it may work and actually build to something else. So if there is that ability to pilot and to look at walkability and to think of all the things that add up into walkability, it could just be something as simple as making sure the sidewalks look good. Or sometimes I like Tempe for especially has a lot of, I like to say, texture, because they bring in kind of bricks or pavers. So sometimes you've got interests like that. It might be putting on sidewalk clings. That could be public art. that are just kind of, you know, even in just a space of a sidewalk, or just bring some interest, planters, trees, you know, murals, because people love murals, love getting their pictures taken with murals especially. So, you know, Jeff Speck has an incredible book on walkability if you haven't read it. But there's so many things that you can do, and if you don't have a ton of money, Better Block does a lot of, is it Better Block? Better, yeah, but they got it, that's like that kind of guerrilla style placemaking, like painting, you know, old tires in a bunch of different colors and sitting those out and turning those into tables and chairs. And, you know, doing like an activation where you're bringing in board games and a DJ. And, you know, boom, all of a sudden you've got a, maybe not a big full-blown event, but you've got a tiny activation where people are really interested in those spaces. And then you can kind of prove to mayors that maybe this is something that if they want to see some more economic generation in this area, let's maybe put some more funding, you know, as it becomes available.
Don't all of you then have, even if you're small towns, very concentrated, even if it's a block area?
Like a main street.
Yeah, like something that's somewhat walkable. So I would say start small and just do one or two things in that small area. And if you don't even have that, then I would go back to the things that are car, like that are car visible, you know, like signages, there's signage that's designed for pedestrians and signage that's designed for cars. So like, I would focus on things that are interesting and stimulating in the area that you want to cultivate. That's our plan.
We used our farmer's market as kind of a generator for that, because we had a lot of vacant land and. not
You
a
have
whole
it
lot-
downtown.
Well, right, but I'm thinking 20 years ago, like when we didn't have, you know, when we had, you know, a small Main Street area, we brought people to downtown via farmer's market. And it became, again, that cultural place that people were congregating. And through that, we were able to advocate, you know, this is, you know, there's a vision for this area. And you could see how, you know, we're attracting people to this area. It became a sticky space. And so through that effort, and it was just one event really.
I was gonna say, we're doing something a little bit, I guess, more risky, but we actually did some key kind of measurements of how far people will walk before there's different things to entertain them or to keep them occupied. And we started to realize that our downtown wasn't necessarily conducive to that. And so our town council has now invested in some east-west connector roads, which will start to create those urban blocks, which then you can kind of program, hopefully, to bring the people. So it's a risk because there isn't necessarily development there, and it's a huge investment from a town council perspective, but hopefully it'll pay off in dividends when developers start to come in as well.
So you guys do similar things with infill sites then, right? Like infill sites that are vacant and activating them.
There's a lot of really amazing like software too. So if you don't have bodies to sit out and count things, Eco Counter makes a really great product where you pop it on a couple of streetlights and they are your counters, and you can move them around into different spaces. And then you've got like almost like the data in a way to really show what a temporary activation can do for a space.
You had a question?
Yeah, there's a lot of things that you can do. We used to do pop-up parks. And just over the weekend with pallets, potted plants, with outdoor seating places. We did a live after 5 programs where you just set certain parts of your area off for pedestrian use only, and people, businesses were open later. They did special things. You know, they did wine walks. They did different things to attract people into those areas. We had some unused alley areas that they turned into pedways for people to gather and be around. There's a lot of things you can start doing, but even once a month activity where you draw people there and begin to pedestrian, at least pedestrian friendly, then they'll go, why don't you do this twice a month? Or why don't you do this once a week? Or, you know, pretty soon places just naturally develop. You'll find that corner that people frequent the most, or that space, that feed store where we go to talk. I mean, it's just, those things happen almost organically if you just give them opportunities.
Yeah. Did you have a question?
I did, and my question is regarding ambassadors. How are they chosen? Are they volunteers or are they paid employees? How does that work?
Yeah, so there are a few different companies that do this kind of work, they contract. So in Tempe, it's Block by Block that provides a lot of the, they do provide all the services.
Yeah, so we're block by
Yeah.
block, and Tim was saying that, or in the video, Phoenix was talking about how theirs are paid in-house.
Yeah.
They're not the security function.
Yeah.
In downtown Phoenix, they're just hospitality. We needed security. And so to give yourself a buffer, we use block by block. That way they can hire and fire and they're insured and they're licensed security professionals. So that's, but they are all paid. All of ours are paid. And yours are.
So it's interesting in Mesa, it's both. So our clean side of our program is contracted right now through Street Plus. And we're building an ambassador program in-house. So, you know, I think it's critical when you're thinking of these and how much money you would want to put towards this. Again, it's, there's metrics that you can, you know, how many people did they greet? How many people did, you know, we track everything from
Everything.
how many businesses did we send people into? How many pieces of trash did we pick up? How many, you know, pounds were we emptying? How many graffiti tags were removed?
How many pieces of gum we removed from the sidewalk?
Yeah, literally everything, just to kind of show that this is how the money is sort of being spent to prove that service. In Phoenix, they start at 15. Mesa, we actually started at 17.
We're at 17.
So it's, they are pricey. You can, I know there are some programs in the country that start with volunteers. Volunteers are volunteers. So, you know, they come out of the goodness of their heart. They're gonna give you the greatest 2 to 4 hours of their day on a Saturday. You know, so if you really want somebody that's gonna kind of come in and do this regularly, you really do have to look at it being sort of a paid position. But again, that might just be we're gonna pilot, we're gonna try with a couple of volunteers and just see where we go and what, you know, what might be helpful in that space. Put on some cute t-shirts and, you know.
My whole budget is 3.5 million and a third of it goes to clean and safe, combined clean and safe, because it is the most important thing to the property owners. So we do document
Every
everything
little last
and
thing.
then share that out in, you know, reports to the property owners on a regular basis.
Sorry, one more follow-up for you. So I know Mesa is a, you know, pretty, I think, safe community, but so, you know, if you're.
Oh, you should come in. I literally had a meeting this morning with the, one of the commanders in the police department. They had a intensive, kind of summer, like, I forget what they called it, some fancy, like, I don't know, we're gonna get all the bad people in the summer. But 84,000 fentanyl pills were, you know, collected, confiscated, thank you. I was like, that C word, the good C word. Sorry. But, you know, like that's, you know, so it's relative.
Safe for the money.
Safe,
I'll
yeah.
finish.
Yeah,
Safe for the
sorry.
money.
Yeah.
And so if you're doing it in-house, have you found that there's like, there's a lot of, I guess, liability management in case, because you have somebody who's working out there, especially in an area that most of these is safety and all of a sudden they're attacked. I mean, that kind of comes down on the organizations. How they have to deal with that.
So we, our policy for liability insurance, we actually take a look at, for our hospitality program, that's like theme park worker liability insurance. And I don't remember the exact limits off the top of my head, but if it's something that you're really interested in, I can get those to you. So that's one of the key things is that I would imagine your liability insurance covers for security guards.
It does.
So a little
Yeah.
bit, you know, different. So that's a big piece of it. And then you're training for what hospitality is and what the expectations are there and what a security guard is able to do, because there's a little bit of nuance there and what that line is. And once you cross that line, you're in a different kind of security world. So that piece of it is really important. And then we got like the normal kind of workman's comp. All of our ambassadors are benefited as well. So medical, dental, vision, so there's kind of all these layers of coverage that help with the program as well.
I guess the city didn't find it to be more safe, we have them contracted out and let the contractor take all the liability.
If we still take the liability.
Yeah.
I mean, they take some of it.
Yeah.
But we're paying a heightened, hourly rate, right, so that they take some of that. But we still have liability insurance. And the one thing I want to add, because I know you have a question about this, is that this is where we're seeing the most difficulty hiring right now. Like you're hearing about it from your restaurants and your hotels and all of that. Like for us, it's this entry level labor, clean and safe, where we are having the most difficulty hiring right now.
So with the legislative difficulty of bid programs and the enhanced services, and while you're an outside authority versus an in-house city employee, how are the ambassadors funded when bid programs can't come about very easily anymore? So you have that downtown HOA, so to speak, district, wanting to pay for it, but the legislation saying, sorry, that's an extra taxation to the public. We don't want that. So, how do you find that balance, and how do you start something in today's day and age of doing that? The existing 6 or 7 that are out there, I get it, but how do you do it today? How do you fund that?
Yeah, so I was gonna say, there is a Jen and, well, really the 3 of you, I think it really kind of helped to pull this Arizona Downtowns group together. And I know, I saw Kira for a hot second. But I know there's this kind of push to take a look at that legislative policy and whether it really makes sense. There is a way to get it done with the right sort of petitioning effort, which takes a lot of time and money. Hey, maybe get some volunteers. But that's one of the things to take a look at. In the interim, CDC sort of style, we all have this, we make these agreements to put money into here, into this organization. We're all nonprofits, so mostly 501c6. So, we've got almost more like a membership versus true charity 501c3, although we have a 501c3, I'm sure you guys do too. So there are some kind of ways to get around it, but you really have got to have sort of your base group who would hopefully be able to put up real dollars to make some of that happen. To have an ambassador, you're looking at probably $35,000 at least to pay that person. Another 1,500 or so maybe in benefits, and then uniform, sort of expenses. So 40K may be like a good kind of ballpark about what you would want to pay for that. And me personally, I never like putting ambassadors out expensive, so I say go for 80K if you can to get a program started, because 2 is better, safer in that.
Do you have a big private entity that might partner with the city? Like a really large corporation that's connected to Maricopa that might?
It's coming. It's
Okay.
not quite there yet, and that's, these are all things, and I'm not sure
Right.
we're quite ready for it, but
Right.
I'm interested, especially from the legislative side.
Right.
Sadly, you talk about GIPLETs, and GIPLETs are constantly eroded by the state senator who represents my district. And so it's something that we go head to head with all the time, because he doesn't understand economic development. And so,
Yeah.
It drives me nuts to hear, our legislators sit here and talk about how 38 other states do something.
Yeah.
And then I can point to it and say, well, let's look at TIF, and,
No tip. We have no tip.
49 other states do it. Why won't we?
Right.
So, and I can argue this all day long, but it's political theorem versus actual boots on the ground. So, like I said, for me, it's an understanding and also knowing how to play the game, which is that as businesses come together and work, and then, effectively work with the city, it makes it easy for me to use my political connections to take that to the state legislature and say, look, your businesses are crying out for this. This is what they want. How do we do this in something that's both acceptable to you, as well as, reinventing this or revitalizing it in a way that maybe wasn't the traditional way, but has some sort of workability moving forward that is uniquely Arizona. But this whole philosophy of we're just gonna carve it out and not utilize it anymore is not helpful.
I think that we should all be advocating for when there's a change in leadership at the state level, revisiting this. I'm also on the board of our tourism bureau and they wanted to do a TID. And that was, not possible. And we went all the way up to the top to try to see if we could make that happen. So I think if all of our entities are talking about this, so tourism, downtowns, everything, I think we could revisit it. There will be leadership changes soon.
This is a
Um,
big, yeah.
It's a big, huge issue,
discussion.
and we're all paying into advocacy for it. Like, we're all willing to pay lobbyists to fight this. But I do know that when we did the streetcar, there was a gap in the federal and the state funding that we received. And we had like 4 different private commercial entities partner with the city to cover the gap. So sometimes I think if they really want it,
Yeah,
and then you're leveraging
Phoenix, Roosevelt Row, who was
the emphasis of all of
the,
this.
the,
Yeah,
the strong network that comes back.
Yeah.
They still function as a CDC. And there are still people that give into that CDC and are still trying to, and as new businesses have come into that area, it's more voices that continue to push that they want their district, represented as a business improvement district. So I think if you stay connected to AZ downtowns, there's a way to kind of move this ball forward.
Also voluntary membership districts. I came from one of those too. They're harder to get, there's less funding, but it's something, it's a start. And then it helps advocate those businesses then push for the bid when you're ready for it. So lots of merchant associations turn into bids.
And what are you trying to, again, that sort of goes back to your audience, what are you trying to, are you revitalizing an area? Do you want to build up an area? Like what story are you really trying to tell? So that sort of built in what you're doing is critical.